I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
No one expected silence to fall so heavy over Kensington Palace. When Princess Catherine stepped forward, pale, poised, and visibly shaken, the world stopped breathing. Her voice trembled as she revealed what royal insiders had feared for weeks. The news about Prince William wasn't a rumor, wasn't speculation. It was a truth that shattered the very foundation of the monarchy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began as an ordinary morning at the palace, the kind that carried the same rehearsed calm, the same elegant routine that defined royal life. But beneath that polished surface, tension simmered. The press had already sensed something was off. William had vanished from several key appearances without explanation. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors. The royal calendar was quietly cleared, and palace photographers were told to hold back until further notice. It was the kind of silence that screamed. Then, without warning, Catherine emerged. Not through a grand balcony or a carefully arranged photo call, but alone on the steps of Kensington. Her eyes were steady, but her hands clutched the podium as if she were holding the entire weight of the crown itself. The crowd of journalists fell still. No one expected her to be the one to speak, but when she did, the sound of her voice broke like glass. "I have something I must share," she began, and even those words seemed to echo through every hallway of power. There was no statement from the press office, no royal seal, no attempt to soften the blow. Just Catherine stripped of titles, stripped of rehearsed grace, speaking as a wife in pain. And then she said his name, William. The moment she did, the air shifted. Reporters who'd covered royal events for decades said they had never seen such stillness. Catherine's face told a story before her words did. What she revealed next was not about duty, not about politics, but about love and loss. About a man torn between the throne and his humanity. About choices made in the dark that had finally come to light. The world listened, frozen, as she spoke of struggle, exhaustion, and the impossible burden her husband carried. The burden of being both a leader and a man, slowly breaking beneath the pressure. She spoke of the pain that comes when silence becomes survival and truth becomes a threat. Her voice faltered only once when she said, "He can no longer hide from what's coming." No one understood what that meant at first. The words hung in the air like prophecy. Was it illness? Betrayal? A royal crisis waiting to explode? Every broadcaster scrambled for answers, every headline lit up with speculation. Within minutes, the palace gates were surrounded. The public's devotion turned into disbelief. Catherine's revelation wasn't just an announcement, it was an earthquake. Behind her, the windows of Kensington remained closed. No royal official appeared. No aide stepped forward. Catherine stood alone against the storm she had unleashed. And in that moment, the world saw something that felt almost forbidden, vulnerability from within the most controlled family on earth. And yet, even as the broadcast cut to black, the feeling lingered. She hadn't told the whole story. Her words were a doorway, not an ending. What she revealed was only the beginning of something much larger, a truth that stretched deep into the heart of the monarchy itself. As the world scrambled for answers, the truth Catherine revealed was only the surface. The real story began long before that moment on the palace steps. Behind palace gates, time had been running differently for months. Those closest to William noticed the exhaustion in his eyes, the hesitation in his smile. But the palace insisted everything was fine until it wasn't. Catherine, torn between her role as a mother and a wife, had been carrying the unbearable truth. William's health had quietly deteriorated under the weight of royal duty and unspoken pressure. At first, it was easy to dismiss. A missed engagement here, a delayed appearance there. The kind of things the palace could easily explain away, with talk of scheduling conflicts or private matters. But those who truly knew William began to see what others could not. The once confident future king now seemed distant, preoccupied, and burdened by a silence that grew heavier with each passing week. His laughter, once spontaneous, had become measured. His public smiles looked rehearsed. Catherine watched helplessly as the man she loved began to fade behind the mask of duty. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere grew tense. Aides whispered in corridors, their loyalty caught between truth and tradition. Catherine was left increasingly alone, surrounded by people, yet isolated by protocol. Every time she tried to speak of her concern, she was told the same thing: the crown comes first. But how could a crown matter when the person beneath it was breaking? She tried to hide his struggles from the world, canceling events, protecting him from photographers, creating excuses that fooled no one. In doing so, she became both his guardian and his prisoner. The palace's official line grew colder as rumors spread. Reports surfaced that William was taking time for personal reasons, but behind that phrase lay a painful secret. Conflicting accounts from royal aides only deepened the mystery. Some insisted it was exhaustion. Others hinted at a personal matter, threatening his composure. Catherine knew the truth. The pressures of expectation, the endless comparisons, the shadow of a mother lost too soon, it was all taking its toll. The monarchy demanded strength, but even kings in waiting bleed in silence. In secret, a medical specialist was brought quietly to Sandringham. No motorcade, no announcement, just a single car at dawn, and a name never entered into official records. The diagnosis, whispered behind closed doors, was enough to shake Catherine to her core. It wasn't just about physical health. It was the mind, the spirit, the unbearable weight of being next in line. Catherine tried to hold him together, soothing his fears, encouraging him to rest. But William's sense of duty refused to bend. To step back felt like weakness, and weakness was something the crown could never show. At home, the cost of secrecy became unbearable. George began asking why his father wasn't coming to dinner. Charlotte, ever perceptive, noticed her mother's tears. Catherine would smile through the pain, telling them their father was working, though the word itself began to feel like a lie. Every night, she sat beside William, watching him drift between exhaustion and guilt, knowing that love alone could no longer protect him from what he was facing. Her breaking point came quietly, not with a scream, but with a realization. Silence, she understood, was no longer an act of love. It was complicity. Every lie, every deflection, every carefully worded press release only deepened his suffering. Catherine made a choice that night, one that would alter the course of their lives and send tremors through the monarchy. She decided that the truth, however painful, had to be spoken. But the illness wasn't the only secret. What Catherine revealed next would redefine not just her marriage, but the monarchy itself. The royal image was never just about smiles and ceremonies. Beneath the surface, William's role as future king had become a battlefield. Catherine's confession hinted at more than illness. It spoke of betrayal, manipulation, and the impossible weight of the crown pressing on her husband's soul. The monarchy demanded strength, but William was breaking. Behind the grandeur of the palace gates, there was a quiet, merciless war being waged not with armies or weapons, but with words, expectations, and the crushing force of royal duty. King Charles had grown increasingly impatient. To the public, his message was one of unity and transition. But in private, his tone was cold, deliberate, and commanding. William was to step up, he said, take on more responsibility, more visibility, more control. To the king, it was simple succession. To William, it felt like a noose, tightening around his freedom. Every meeting ended the same way, Charles insisting on duty, William walking out in silence. Catherine left to pick up the pieces of a man torn between two worlds. Catherine tried to mediate. She believed there was still a bridge between father and son, a fragile space where empathy might survive. But the truth was, that bridge had long been burned by years of tension, jealousy, and unspoken pain. Each conversation between them became colder, more calculated. William accused his father of treating him not as a son, but as a prop for the institution. Charles countered with reminders of lineage, destiny, and sacrifice. Catherine watched helplessly as two generations of monarchy clashed, their pride too strong to bend. The weight of the crown had begun to fracture not just a family, but the future itself. In the midst of this growing rift, something more haunting surfaced. Private letters, written late into the night, began to reveal William's growing doubt about his role in royal life. In them, he confessed his exhaustion, his anger, and the fear that he was becoming a prisoner of his birthright. "I am losing myself," one line reportedly read, "and when I am gone, who will I even be?" For Catherine, reading those words was like watching the man she loved vanish in real time. She had once believed their love could soften the weight of the throne, that her presence could balance his sense of duty with something real, something human. But the crown was not meant to be loved, it was meant to be served. As the tension between father and son grew, so did the echoes of the past. Diana's shadow lingered in every argument, every accusation. Catherine could feel it, the same suffocating cycle her husband's mother had endured. The same palace walls that had once silenced Diana now seemed to close around William. The irony was unbearable. The monarchy had promised to evolve, to modernize, to learn from its past. And yet, here they were again, another generation drowning in silence, another heir consumed by the weight of expectation. Catherine's role became both impossible and tragic. She was wife, confidant, mediator, and protector, all while trying to maintain her own composure in a world where vulnerability was seen as weakness. Behind every smile in public, there was a night of quiet tears in private. She realized, perhaps too late, that love could not save him from what he was born into. The system was too vast, too merciless, too invested in keeping its heirs loyal and its secrets buried. And as she tried to hold him together, another figure began to loom in the shadows. Someone who had everything to gain from William's fall. While the public grieved and speculated, the queen consort remained notably quiet. Camilla's calm demeanor masked a storm of palace maneuvering. As William withdrew from public view, Camilla's circle began consolidating influence. Some say she merely filled a void. Others whisper she saw opportunity in tragedy. The perfect moment to secure her lineage's hold over the crown's next chapter. In the weeks following Catherine's emotional announcement, the palace descended into a strange and chilling stillness. Public sympathy surrounded the princess, but inside the royal corridors, power was shifting in silence. While Catherine tended to a husband fading under pressure, Camilla was working behind the scenes. Her charm, her patience, her ability to move unseen all became tools in a game that few even realized was being played. Insiders began leaking reports of quiet meetings taking place at Clarence House. Senior advisors, once loyal to William, were suddenly being reassigned, replaced, or subtly pushed aside. No official statement was ever made. Yet somehow, Camilla's voice began to echo louder in the rooms that mattered most. At first, it seemed harmless, a queen consort stepping in to maintain stability while the heir recovered. But stability, in royal terms, often comes at a cost. Slowly, decisions that once required William's input were handled elsewhere. His private secretary, his communications advisor, even a long-trusted aide who had served him since his university days, all quietly replaced under the pretext of modernization. Catherine noticed the changes almost immediately. Messages she sent to senior staff went unanswered. Meetings were postponed. Invitations never reached her. The walls of Kensington were closing in. not by scandal or exposure, but by isolation. She had become a guest within her own royal circle. And at the center of it all was Camilla, calm, composed, and increasingly powerful. Her allies described her as steadying the ship. Her critics called it something else entirely: consolidation. For every decision made in William's absence, Camilla's approval seemed to linger in the margins. She held private dinners with senior courtiers, extended her influence into the treasury of the duchy, and quietly ensured that her son Tom Parker Bowles was seen at more high-level events. To the outside world, it was subtle, almost invisible. But to Catherine, it was unmistakable, the groundwork for something far larger than mere administrative support. Then came the whispers, the kind that travel through polished halls and end in scandal. Prince Harry's name began reappearing in conversations about succession, contingency planning, they called it, a matter of constitutional prudence. But Catherine knew better. It wasn't planning, it was positioning. The monarchy had always thrived on control, and in William's absence, control was slipping. Camilla's silence was not the stillness of restraint, it was strategy. The more she said nothing, the more the world looked to her for stability. She had turned absence into authority. Meanwhile, the contrast between Clarence House and Kensington grew stark. Clarence House was described as serene, almost unnaturally calm, while Kensington was in turmoil. Leaks, press speculation, rumors of marital tension, all feeding a narrative that painted Catherine as fragile and William as unstable. Those close to Catherine claimed she began to suspect a deliberate campaign, subtle, elegant, devastating. One insider later described it as a quiet suffocation of influence. Finally, came the moment no one expected: Catherine confronting Camilla directly. The details of that conversation remain locked in the palace's vault of secrets, but whispers suggest it was neither polite nor private. Catherine, exhausted and furious, demanded answers about the removals, the rumors, and the manipulation. Camilla, ever composed, reportedly told her, "You must understand, dear, this is the way the crown survives." The words struck Catherine like ice. It was a reminder that in the monarchy, compassion was weakness, and survival was everything. In the aftermath of that confrontation, nothing was ever quite the same. Catherine's public appearances became rarer. Camilla's presence, meanwhile, became impossible to ignore. She smiled for the cameras, hosted the dinners, and carried herself like someone who had already won. Yet behind that composure lay the coldest truth of all in the House of Windsor. Silence was not submission, it was control. But even as royal politics twisted around her, Catherine's focus was elsewhere, on the man she loved, whose silence had become more terrifying than his words. For weeks, Catherine vanished from the public eye. When she returned, she carried something far heavier than the crown: the truth. In a private message shared with close confidants and later leaked to the press, she spoke of William's hidden pain, the guilt, the exhaustion, and a decision that would break the heart of a nation. The heir to the throne had made a choice that no one saw coming. When the silence finally broke, it came not through a press conference or an official statement, but through a letter handwritten, deeply personal, and filled with quiet despair. Catherine had written it not as a princess, but as a wife on the edge of heartbreak. It spoke of nights spent waiting for answers, of watching the man she loved slip further into a darkness no title could protect him from. She described William's torment, the unbearable guilt, of being both the symbol of hope for millions and a prisoner to a destiny he no longer wished to bear. The words were raw, unfiltered, and devastating. She had begged for understanding, not sympathy. But the world, once again, demanded everything. The letter's leak changed everything. What had begun as private, agony became national tragedy. The headlines screamed betrayal and collapse. Royal watchers debated every word, every phrase. Yet behind those sensational lines lay something deeper. William's confession to step away indefinitely from royal duty. It wasn't an abdication, not formally, but it was something far more human: surrender. He had chosen his sanity over his title, his peace over his crown, and in doing so, he had broken the unspoken rule of the monarchy: the duty must come before all else. Inside the family, the reaction was explosive. King Charles was said to be furious, his anger as much about control as it was about disappointment. He viewed William's decision not just as weakness, but as defiance. To him, this was more than a son's crisis, it was a threat to the very order of the monarchy. Camilla, however, remained composed, her silence sharper than words. While the king raged, she observed. Some said she sympathized quietly. Others believed she saw in William's withdrawal a quiet victory, one that secured her own influence in the void he left behind. Catherine, meanwhile, bore the brunt of the storm. The press followed her every step, turning her plea for privacy into front-page fodder. Every tear, every absence, every hesitant smile was dissected. She had once been the nation's strength, now she was its sorrow. Yet, through it all, she maintained her poise. Even as the walls closed in, she chose grace over chaos. And then came the moment that left the world speechless, a simple gesture, one that spoke louder than any statement. At a charity event weeks later, Catherine appeared without her engagement ring. The cameras caught it instantly. The symbol of royal unity was gone, replaced by the quiet defiance of a woman standing in truth. But beneath the glamour, beneath the tragedy, splashed across tabloids, there was something far more haunting. A love story collapsing under the weight of tradition. Catherine had fought for him, protected him, sacrificed her peace for his. Yet even love, pure as it was, could not withstand the machinery of monarchy. The palace had demanded perfection, and in that pursuit, it had broken the very people who gave it life. Still, there was something different in Catherine's silence this time. It wasn't the silence of grief, it was the calm before a reckoning. Because as the monarchy scrambled to restore its image, Catherine was preparing to do something no royal woman had ever done before. She would not retreat, nor remain a figure of pity. Her next move would not be of submission, but of courage, one that would force the world to see the royal family through a lens it had never dared to look through before. And yet, even in despair, Catherine's next move hinted at defiance, a step that would change how the world saw the royal family forever. Weeks after the announcement, a new scandal erupted. Secret recordings surfaced from within the palace walls. Voices, arguments, and confessions that no one was meant to hear. Among them, one clip that froze the nation. Catherine and William's final private conversation before his disappearance from public life. In that moment, the world heard heartbreak, regret, and a warning. The recordings came out of nowhere, a quiet storm that broke the fragile silence surrounding the monarchy. No one knew who released them or how such intimate moments from deep within Kensington's walls could have reached the public. At first, the palace dismissed it as fabrication, a cruel attempt to exploit a family already in crisis. But within hours, confirmation came from multiple sources. The voices were authentic. Catherine's trembling words, William's strained tone, the echo of pain that no editor could fake. A dismissed palace aide was soon named as the suspected leak, someone once trusted with access to the couple's private quarters. The betrayal cut deeper than anyone could imagine. The content of the recordings was more devastating than the leak itself. What began as a conversation between husband and wife unfolded into a raw confession of exhaustion, of love tested beyond measure, of a royal couple at war with their destiny. William's voice, once firm and composed in public, was almost unrecognizable. In one chilling moment, he said the words that would haunt the monarchy forever. The crown isn't worth our lives. It was not defiance, but surrender. A statement that revealed the depth of despair behind the palace gates. Catherine's response, soft yet breaking, spoke volumes. She pleaded for him not to give up, not to let the system destroy what little of themselves they had left. It was a glimpse into a marriage burdened by expectation and a love suffocating under the weight of royal duty. The leak ignited chaos across the nation. News outlets dissected every second, analysts debated every pause and sigh, while loyalists begged the palace for transparency. The monarchy, built on silence and control, suddenly found itself exposed in the most intimate way imaginable. Behind the scenes, the royal communications team scrambled to contain the damage, crafting statements, managing headlines, calling for privacy that no one would grant. The image of perfection had been shattered, replaced by something far more human and therefore far more dangerous. As the recordings continued to circulate, darker questions began to emerge. Who really benefited from their release? Some suggested it was an act of revenge by the dismissed aide, but others hinted at something deeper: manipulation, perhaps even orchestration from higher up. The timing was too precise, too destructive. It came when the monarchy was already fractured, when Catherine's trust was hanging by a thread. There were whispers that someone within the institution had wanted the truth to come out, not to protect the couple, but to control the narrative. The idea that their pain could be weaponized was almost too cruel to comprehend, yet too plausible to dismiss. For Catherine, the revelation was both devastating and clarifying. Hearing her own words echo through the media stripped of context, twisted by interpretation, was a nightmare she couldn't wake from. But somewhere within that humiliation, something shifted. Her grief began to harden into resolve. If the monarchy could no longer protect her family, she would protect the truth herself. She refused to let William's suffering be reduced to scandal. His words turned into headlines. She knew the institution would bury it all if they could, but Catherine had decided that silence was no longer her duty. The monarchy had survived wars, divorces, abdications, and betrayal. But this was different. This was vulnerability broadcast to the world, the sound of its future heir crumbling beneath its own weight. And for the first time, the illusion of royal strength felt like exactly what it was: an illusion. And from the ruins of that heartbreak, Catherine began crafting something that no royal had dared to do before her own truth. The woman once known for grace and silence found her voice, and it shook the crown. Catherine began speaking not as a princess, but as a wife, a mother, and a witness. She refused to let William's story be rewritten by palace PR. Her interviews, her letters, her defiance, each act a quiet revolution inside an institution built on secrecy. It began slowly, almost cautiously. A single interview, gentle, composed, but piercing in truth. Catherine didn't attack, she revealed. She spoke of pain disguised as duty, of a man who carried the weight of centuries on his shoulders until it nearly broke him. Her words weren't rehearsed by palace staff or filtered through royal press officers. They were hers, raw, deliberate, and deeply human. The world listened, captivated, and for the first time in decades, the public's sympathy shifted not toward the monarchy, but toward the woman who had dared to challenge it. Every appearance she made became an event. Every sentence she spoke carried the weight of rebellion. Catherine called for compassion, for openness, for honesty, values the institution claimed to uphold but had long buried under ceremony and protocol. Her calm voice contrasted sharply with the whispers echoing through the palace corridors. Officials called her behavior unbecoming. Privately, they called it dangerous. Within weeks, reports began to circulate, anonymous sources accusing her of emotional instability, of being too fragile to lead, of letting grief cloud her judgment. It was a calculated move, an old strategy repurposed to silence her. But this time, the narrative didn't hold. Instead of weakening her, The backlash strengthened her cause. Every attempt to undermine her only deepened global sympathy. The world had changed. The public no longer saw her as a delicate royal, but as a woman standing alone against an empire of silence. Her sincerity cut through the polished facades of monarchy, forcing people to question what else was hidden behind those gilded gates. Letters of support poured in from across the globe, from world leaders, activists, and even former palace employees who had witnessed the same cold machinery of control. A quiet alliance began to form around her, not of power, but of truth. Behind the scenes, Catherine's defiance became the monarchy's greatest threat. Every interview she gave, every article she penned, every moment she spoke, her truth eroded the institution's carefully maintained image. Her words were not vindictive, they were illuminating. She spoke of the toll that silence takes, of how duty can destroy love, and of how loyalty, when forced, becomes a cage. Her message was clear. The story would no longer be controlled by those who benefited from its distortion. This story, she said in one powerful address, will not end in silence. The effect was seismic. Poles shifted. Public trust in the monarchy began to falter. Even within royal circles, quiet divisions emerged. Those who believed Catherine's openness was a necessary reckoning, and those who saw it as betrayal. But Catherine was no longer seeking approval. She had moved beyond survival. Her war was no longer about defending her image. It was about restoring the truth that had been buried beneath generations of protocol. And yet, even as the world stood in awe of her courage, the walls around her began to move again. The royal institution, wounded but not broken, was preparing its response. Behind the curtain of civility, strategies were being drawn, alliances rebuilt, narratives rewritten. The monarchy had survived scandal after scandal, and it would not go down without a fight. But as she rose against the establishment, the royal machine prepared its counterstrike, one that threatened everything she had left. When Catherine broke the silence, the palace broke its patience. Leaks, denials, and planted stories flooded the press. A campaign began not of compassion, but of control. Behind every smiling portrait and polished statement, there was a war for narrative. And at its center stood Catherine, unyielding, surrounded, and more powerful than ever. The response was swift and ruthless. Within days of Catherine's revelations, royal aides began orchestrating what insiders would later describe as a containment operation. Reports suddenly appeared across major outlets questioning her stability, her motives, and even her loyalty. Anonymous sources conveniently close to senior palace figures painted her as emotional, erratic, even delusional. The institution that had once celebrated her grace now weaponized it, twisting her poise into the image of fragility. The intention was clear: discredit the messenger to disarm the message. But Catherine refused to break. For every false headline, she responded with silence, not weakness, but strategy. Her calm only made the crown's panic louder. Behind the gilded facade, senior royals gathered to restore control. Meetings stretched late into the night at Buckingham, where loyalty was tested and alliances reaffirmed. The mantra was simple: protect the monarchy at any cost. Camilla led the quiet coordination of influence, ensuring the royal machine spoke with one voice. Charles demanded unity, but in truth, it was fear driving the response. Fear of exposure, fear of losing the moral high ground. The palace could manage scandal, but rebellion from within its own ranks was something else entirely. Catherine's defiance had crossed a line that generations of silence had protected. The press, once predictable, fractured under the weight of the story. Some outlets defended the institution, clinging to tradition and privilege, while others saw Catherine as a symbol of truth, the first royal in modern history to challenge the narrative from inside the cage. Journalists who had long been allies of the monarchy began to question their complicity. For the first time, the institution's control over perception began to slip. What was once unquestioned became uncertain. And uncertainty, for the monarchy, was the first sign of collapse. The campaign against Catherine grew darker. Friends were pressured. Trusted staff members were dismissed. Letters, once private, were mysteriously leaked. Every word she had ever spoken in confidence seemed to find its way into the headlines, distorted to fit the palace's preferred story. Yet, through it all, Catherine's resolve hardened. She understood now that this wasn't about her, it was about power, image, and the centuries-old illusion that royalty was untouchable. If she stayed silent, the truth would die with her. So, she made a choice that no one expected. Ignoring royal advisors and palace protocol, Catherine prepared a public address, one unsanctioned, unapproved, and unstoppable. The palace tried to intervene, warning her of irreparable consequences. But Catherine had already crossed the threshold of fear. She would not be remembered as the woman who broke under pressure, but as the one who broke the cycle of silence. When the day came, the world held its breath. Catherine stood before the cameras, not as a royal, but as a human being who had lost, endured, and risen again. Her statement was brief but seismic. She spoke of truth as the only legacy worth protecting, of love as something greater than duty, and of pain as the price of silence. It was not anger that guided her, but conviction, the kind that terrifies those who build their power on secrecy. Her final words cut through every wall the monarchy had built to protect itself. I will no longer live in a story written by others. And when she finally stood before the cameras, her words would pierce through the monarchy's walls like thunder through stained glass. Catherine's voice trembled, but it never broke. She spoke of love, loss, and a man who gave everything to a system that took too much. Her final revelation wasn't about power, it was about humanity. The tragedy of Prince William wasn't just his downfall, but what it revealed, that even within palaces of gold, hearts can shatter in silence. Her final address was nothing short of historic. There were no royal emblems behind her, no gilded podium, no coat of arms to remind the world who she was supposed to be. What she offered that day was something far more powerful than any crowned truth. Catherine spoke with a calm that only comes from pain that has been lived, not rehearsed. She spoke of a man who loved his people but was broken by the expectations placed upon him. Of a husband who had tried to hold together a dynasty that no longer knew how to love its own. And when she spoke of William, her words carried a quiet devastation. She didn't speak of titles or destiny. She spoke of him simply as the man she loved, the father of her children, the soul who couldn't find peace in a world that demanded perfection. Her message struck something deep in the nation's heart. For years, the public had been spectators to royal drama, loyal to spectacle, blind to suffering. But now, they saw the human cost. Crowds gathered outside palaces, not to cheer, but to grieve. Vigils lit the streets of London. Across the world, people who had never cared for monarchy found themselves moved by the rawness of her confession. For the first time, a royal story wasn't about scandal, it was about empathy. Catherine had turned her pain into purpose, her silence into strength. Inside the palace, however, the atmosphere was different. No statements, no denials, no rebuttals, only silence. The monarchy, so accustomed to control, understood what had happened. Catherine had changed the narrative forever. Behind closed doors, even the most traditional courtiers acknowledged that something irreversible had begun. The institution had not collapsed, but it had been forced to look in the mirror, and for the first time, it didn't like what it saw. Quiet reforms followed, subtle shifts in tone and behavior, all unspoken acknowledgments that the world Catherine had dared to expose could no longer exist as it had. In the weeks that followed, Catherine withdrew from royal life. There was no grand resignation, no televised farewell. She simply faded from the public eye, returning to her children, her home, and her private world. Yet her absence only amplified her presence. Every photo of her became symbolic. Every quote, every memory, replayed across the globe, as if people feared forgetting the woman who had taught them that even the most gilded life can carry unbearable weight. The final image that defined her legacy was one captured by chance. Catherine seated quietly in William's study, her hand resting on his untouched chair. It wasn't sorrow that radiated from her, but acceptance. She had loved deeply, lost profoundly, and spoken bravely. And through that, she had become something greater than any royal title could. Bestow a symbol of truth in a world built on silence. The legend that followed was not of a broken princess, but of a woman who dared to speak when speaking was forbidden. And as the palace lights dimmed that night, one truth remained. Catherine's words had rewritten history itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe.